It's time for Best Value presented by DraftKings. We've got our picks for the guys that might give you the most bang for your DFS buck in week 6. So we'll start off quarterback. What are you looking at this week, Florio?
I'm going with Ryan Fitzpatrick. He feels a little bit underpriced here. He is the QB7 right now on the season. He has scored 21 plus fantasy points in 4 straight games. And the Jets have allowed 26 or more to both of Josh Allen and Kyler Murray, and they really haven't been tested elsewise other than that. So I know they come in ranking middle of the pack in fantasy points allowed to quarterbacks, but I think that Fitzy has the chance to really put up a lot more in what is kind of a revenge game for the Dolphins against Adam Gase.
Yeah, I guess it kind of is, right? Like, it's a chance to get a little get back. I'm going to go with Kirk Cousins there. And I know we sort of advocated to start him last week against the Seahawks. The results weren't particularly great. He got you about 14, 15 points. But I'm going to double down this week because he's got the Falcons on the schedule. And I know they just let go of their head coach, Dan Quinn, but they still have a lot of questions to answer on the defensive side of the football. So I think that you can go back and maybe it's a little bit more than Fitzpatrick was, but I think the opportunity is still there for Kirk Cousins to go and put up a really big passing game, and it's worth kind of getting him in there to maybe go big somewhere else in your lineup. Okay, over to the running back spots. I thought there's some interesting values this week. Which one did you find the most interesting?
I went with David Montgomery. I'm pretty bullish on him right now. I like him as a DFS value, and in season-long leagues, I'm going to try and acquire him where I can this week before the game. He's been averaging 7 targets per game since Tariq Cohen has gone down, and we saw last week, Marcus, how much that raises his weekly floor. He didn't have a big yardage game, but the 7 catches gave him only nearly 20 fantasy points, and this week, I think he's going to explode against the Panthers. It's just the best matchup for running backs. They're allowing the most fantasy points per game and the most touchdowns to running backs, and that's after they allowed the most of that last season as well. This is just a defense that you can run all over, and I think this week the Bears are going to ask a lot out of Montgomery, so they have to ask less out of Nick Foles.
The target share for David Montgomery has been the pleasant surprise since Tariq Cohen went down. I'm going to go Myles Gaskin here because he has been a pleasant surprise in that Miami backfield all season long, to the point that last week Jordan Howard was a healthy scratch, did not see the field in that blowout win over the 49ers. They are getting him the football. They have a great matchup with the Jets. He has become sort of the running back of record. And in what could be, look, Rank made the point on Fantasy Live earlier this week. Either Fitzpatrick is going to go huge and have 6 touchdown passes, or he's going to implode and have 6 interceptions. But if he goes the route of the 6 touchdowns, that potentially means Myles Gaskin could end up seeing a lot of work, mostly throughout the game, but certainly in the fourth quarter as they try to close this thing out. So I think at $5,400 for the salary, I think Myles Gaskin is a pretty nice pick. All right, so to the wide receivers, A.J. Brown finally came back into our lives, and that was a good thing to see, right?
Yeah, it was awesome to see. I have A.J. Brown in a couple leagues. I took a safe approach last week with him because he was playing on Tuesday, and that game was up in the air. But it was amazing to see. I left that game very happy with what he had. Oh, it was like 9 targets. He had wide receiver 1 production, and Ryan Tannehill from the start of that game was clearly looking his way very often. I think A.J. Brown, we were valuing him as almost a wide receiver 1 in drafts this year, but now his DraftKings price, I don't think has quite caught back up to that yet. So I think he is a good value this week. And I just like the Titans pass game offense now. I've really come around on it.
So maybe the only thing better than finding a value is finding a value stack. And I talked about Kirk Cousins at the quarterback spot, so I figured, well, why not go with Justin Jefferson as one of the wide receivers there? I mean, I talked about that Falcons defense. We all sort of know what the situation is. And this is still a pretty concentrated passing game. If there's one thing we've learned about Kirk Cousins, it's basically he finds 2 targets and he will funnel most of his throws toward those 2 guys. And right now, those 2 guys are clearly Adam Thielen and Justin Jefferson. So I'm willing to take a shot and have him slide back in there. I know last week wasn't great, but we'll give him another chance against another pretty bad secondary. I know I just said that Kirk Cousins funnels his targets through 2 guys, but when we look at the best values for tight ends, you got a Minnesota Viking in there.
It's right now just pick on the Atlanta Falcons defense, and I like your Vikings picks, Marcus. I also would like Adam Thielen this week, but I like Irv Smith Jr. as well. Last week, He saw 5 targets, 4 catches for 64 yards. He ran 31 routes and played 69% of the snaps. Both were season highs. I think he's the better pass catcher of their 2 tight ends. I think Kyle Rudolph is the better blocker, so I'm hoping that leads to more pass game work. And again, pick on the Atlanta Falcons. They're allowing the second most fantasy points per game to tight ends right now. And Irv Smith Jr. is cheaper than my defense, so it's a really good way of saving money and getting some high upside exposure there.
It's sort of nice to see him actually kind of get into things because we were sort of wondering what was going to happen there. I'm going to go with with Ian Thomas, one of the Thomases, Ian Thomas, as my tight end with the Carolina Panthers. I know the matchup doesn't seem great on paper against the Bears, but if there has been a weak point in that defense, it has been their work against tight ends so far this season. I wonder how difficult it's going to be for Teddy Bridgewater to get the ball to, say, Robbie Anderson or DJ Moore, but there could be some opportunities sort of in the middle of the field for Ian Thomas to go out and make some plays. I feel like, unless you're really playing one of the top elite tight ends, we're all just sort of trying to pinpoint touchdowns here, and I think Ian Thomas's work near the end zone could end up being a boost for him. So you mentioned that your defense is slightly more expensive than your tight end. Which defense are you going with this week?
I'm going to go with the Miami Dolphins defense. It's basically just pick on the New York Jets at this point. Their offense, they're to bottom 2. It's them and the Giants flip-flopping each week for fewest points scored on the year. They don't put up a lot of yards. Sam Darnold's up in the air. So there's just Le'Veon Bell's gone. There's just not a lot to like on this Jets offense. And the Dolphins defense has been playing better. Like they've been a lot since week 1. I really feel like they've been stepping it up as of late. So I know you could save a little bit of money here and still get a high upside play in the Dolphins defense.
Well, you talked about picking on the Jets offense. I guess in some ways we're sort of picking on the Giants offense as well. That's why I'm going with the Washington football team as my defense this week. Look, the Giants have had some bright spots. I would say that if you are sort of ranking the 2 New York teams, I'd say the Giants are ahead of the Jets for whatever that's worth. But the issue still continues to be that Daniel Jones just turns the ball over at a horrendous rate. And the way to get points in fantasy for your defense, sacks and turnovers. And so you're just going to continue to kind of pick on a guy who has problems with ball security, who's going to throw interceptions on occasion. And you hope that they sort of get those picks, get those turnovers, get to the quarterback, get some pressure, and get some sacks. So I'm going to go with the Washington football team there against the Giants. So there you go. Those are your daily picks. Happy fantasying for the week. And that was Best Value presented by DraftKings.